Violets on her mouth, secrets in the cellar. Cellars don't sleep, they breathe. After the tasting room locks its grin and the vineyard goes dark enough to hear vines think, the building changes languages. The day talks in laughter and stems, and the brave way first dates swirl their glasses. Night talks in glycol loops and CO2 monitors and the steady, monkish drip of airlocks in their water. Barrels exhale through their pores. The concrete floor holds the day's footprints and decides which to keep. If you've never stood in a cool room tunneled into a hillside and listened to fermentation make its secret music, you don't know how loud quiet can be. My name is Luca, and the cellar belongs to me the way a faithful dog does, by consent, habit, and the shared belief that we love the same work. I'm the cellar master at Tenuta Santa Cruz, a winery that insists it's about family and dirt, all while posing for magazines like a movie that knows its lighting. My ring of keys could anchor a small boat. I carry a tasting thief like a baton and talk to tanks the way priests talk to doubt. I can tell you how an inoculated ferment is feeling by the sound its cap makes when I punch it down, whether a bung is bored or merely misaligned by how it resists my palm. My hands are always stained a little, even with gloves, violet moons pressed into my fingerprints. Arya, my wife, then, makes evenings for a living. She calls herself a brand architect because calling it seduction would be impolite to donors. She can teach a candle to mind its posture. She knows where to put a sprig of rosemary so a stranger decides their night is a good decision. She designs our release parties like liturgies. We married on a Wednesday because we liked stealing serious things from the middle of the week. The clerk at City Hall pressed a pen into Arya's hand with the reverence of a maitre d', recognizing his favorite regular. On the steps, we shared the end of the espresso from my thermos. She wore a white blazer with pockets deep enough to hide a vineyard map. I wore the suit that knows how to forgive my shoulders. Her lipstick kissed the steel cup and then my mouth so it could know the way home. We live above the Cooper's Alley, where the smell of oak smoke wakes you like a rumor. After service, when my hands still vibrated with pump hum and the kind of fatigue that asks for salt, Arya would come late to the cellar. She sat on the cool edge of the bottling line as if it were the only bench ever built. She'd tug my apron by the strings and pull me against her with a knowledge that made the rest of my brain optional. She loved it when I set my mouth in the notch just to the side of her throat and let my breath count an argument into surrender, slow, steady, a metronome teaching her storms another song. I loved the way she said my name when she wasn't using it to remind me the cameras still worked. The first odd thing arrived folded into a chore I've done 1,000 times. Tank 12, a 5,000-liter stainless that purrs like an animal that likes you, logged an unplanned temperature bump at 2:11 a.m. 1 degree. The cooling jacket corrected it the way a careful hand straightens a painting no one else would notice is crooked. On the door to the barrel room, the access reader blinked a 2-second bypass and then recovered its virtue. Nothing missing. No alarm. A hiccup in the night that looked at me a second longer than it needed to. 2 nights later, the same little sin. Tank 12 blushed and behaved. The bypass coughed and then stood at attention. The air smelled faintly, if I am honest with my own nose, of Arya's favorite perfume's cousin, bergamot that had learned about smoke. On the bunghole of a new barrique I'd stolen from the Cooper in a moment of budgetary indiscretion, the silicone cap had turned 10 degrees. I do not leave caps like that. I am the kind of man who remembers the angle of a bung, because I believe in a world where order is kindness. I reached for the jar I keep behind the lab titration kits, the one of food-safe fluorescent powder the sanitation trainer uses to teach hand washing to people who think they have nothing left to learn. I dipped a dry brush into dust as fine as gilt and swept a breath along the underside of the barrel room handle. A whisper over the stainless handrail I installed because I like to pretend we're fancy. A touch around Tank 12's sample tap. A little along the lip of the thief stand where only gloved hands should ever have business. Then I put the jar away as if it had accused me of something, and went back to listening to the airlock's gossip. Arya came that night like a rumor the moon would deny starting. Black dress, the right strappy shoes for mischief, hair that made the barrel head sit up straighter. She tasted the ferment from the thief and licked a drop from my thumb without breaking eye contact. "Your cellar feels like a church after a festival," she said. "Tired and too full of God." "Tank 12 is practicing opinions," I said, acting like the kind of man who thinks jokes land better than questions. She tilted her head. There is a moment in her face, right before she decides to be honest, where the architecture in her collapses into woman. I slid my palm to the side of her throat, not to press, never to press, just to say hello, this is where your voice begins. She softened, not like surrender, but like decision. "Luca," she said, and then, have the modern conversation." "Define modern," I said, as if I didn't hear the word already practicing at the back of her mouth. "Open," she set the syllable between us like a glass we were both supposed to drink from. "Not cruel, not chaos. Rules we tell first, we keep each other first. No one who reports to you, no one who writes my checks. Condom is church, our bed is ours, the cellar," and here she looked around like a queen regarding her basilica, "is a sanctuary." "You wrote the treaty before you asked me to sign," I said, "but there was no acid in it." "I'm trying not to lie," she said, to me, to herself, to the part of her that makes rooms breathe in and wants to be allowed to hear it. We wrote our terms on a cardboard case flap with a Sharpie stolen from the shipping desk. We sealed it with our mouths. I went back to my reticulating pump and my sullen yeast. She went home to her mood boards and the budget that promised a string quartet. We were very good at being adults. In the morning, the blacklight sang its foolish little song. A crescent glowed under the barrel room handle like a bruise deciding to confess. The handrail hummed. Tank 12's tap glittered at the seam. On the thief stand's base, the faint outline of a mouth, dark as cherry skin, waited like a joke God might tell a vintner. On the floor, by the drain, a silver bobby pin lay like punctuation. Arya uses tortoiseshell. This one had a rhinestone that wanted to be a star. The other man's name arrived glossy in an email thread about the harvest dinner. The magazine had booked a photographer to shoot the new release and our artisan process. Nico Morrow. He shot wine like it was a body you'd make bad decisions for. His feed made even our hoses look like co-conspirators. He had the kind of jaw people call cut and the kind of manners that felt like tax-deductible sins. We met by the crush pad where the fruit comes home to confess. He scanned my face, shook my hand with pressure that told me he'd shaken too many hands that tried to impress him. "You're the keeper of the cave," he said with the accent men wear like cologne. "The cave keeps itself," I said. "I just apologize for it when it forgets." He smiled as if he'd make a note to steal the line. His eyes roved the way a lens does when it's pretending not to be hungry. At home, in our kitchen that thinks basil is a personality and the cheap tile is a hobby, Arya told me in sentences that tasted like unfermented honesty. "I used the word I asked for," she said. "I crossed the line about the cellar. I'm sorry. I won't again." "What time?" I asked, because sometimes logistics is what a man has instead of a weapon. She closed her eyes. I closed my mouth. We made breakfast because the eggs asked politely. We did not explode. The treaty held enough to pretend it was a bridge and not a performance. We slept like spoons and sometimes like separate verbs. She kept her promise about the cellar, and I kept my hands off my evidence. We went to work and did it well. The tasting room manager stopped trying to upsell our cheapest customers. The barrels, staves swelled and smiled. I believed the night was done with me. Then I found a lipstick glow on the underside of the lab bench where no mouth had any reason to be, and I did the unpoetic thing. I sat on a pallet in the dark and stared at my stained hands until the cold seduced the heat away from my anger. Arya didn't lie when I asked, which is its own kind of mercy and its own kind of knife. I wanted to be wanted in a room that wasn't made of the two of us, she said. I won't bring him near your work again. We separated like people who respected each other's craft. She moved into a loft with windows that bossed morning around. I kept the battered copper pan I use for reductions and the chipped mug that forgives my hours. She took the kettle that complains before it sings. We kissed once on the curb like diplomats. Hate me clean, she said. If you can't, don't plate it. I promised to try. The cellar made peace with me the way work always does, by handing me problems worth my body. I labored through a stuck ferment and coaxed a shy malolactic into admitting it wanted to be French. A forklift sulked itself into submission. I taught a new harvest kid that gravity and ambition do not make good lovers. The barrels, those faithful cannons, absorbed my penance. I slept alone like a man learning the taste of his own mouth again. Tessa arrived the way good oak announces itself. Not loud, just correct. She's the Cooper in the next alley, the one who can read a stave's future with the side of her thumb. She smells like char and sawdust, and the lemon hand soap our safety officer insists on. She keeps her hair tied up with a leather thong that looks like it remembers other jobs. She can lift a barrique like a question and set it down like an answer. When she laughs, the dogs that hang around our alley decide to sit down and listen. We met properly in the yard by the steam box, a pile of staves sweating themselves into the shapes they'd keep for 50 vintages if we treat them right. I'd cracked a head because I wasn't paying attention. She walked over with the quiet that belongs to people who fix things for a living and ran fingers over the brake like a doctor greeting an old injury. Crows is grumpy today, she said. Wants respect, not force. So do I said. She glanced up, smiled once, and I felt a rivet in my chest buckle into place. The first time we kissed it was behind the stave racks while a late sun bent itself over the hillside. Not a performance, an adjustment. She put a palm on my chest, above the stain that never really leaves, and I set my mouth in the place where shoulder confesses it is neck. She made a sound that wasn't shocked so much as relieved. I placed my hand where a voice begins and didn't ask it to do anything except be there. She likes to keep her eyes open when she shivers, not because she's guarding anything, but because she wants to watch the world stay put while a small revolution happens. With Tessa, I didn't have to forgive myself for wanting. I only had to be precise. We were careful like craftsmen, not cowards. Not the cellar, not the coopering room when the fire is lit. Kitchens after hours. The office couch with the door braced by the empty bottle of last year's reserve. The loading dock when the stars forgot to mind their business. She'd swing into my lap with the intent of a person reading a spec sheet and drag her mouth over mine like she was sanding away a burr. I'd return to the tiny hollow at the base of her throat like a pilgrim who has finally learned why he walks. We spoke in touch and aftercare. We kept both our sanctuaries sacred. If you came for revenge, I sold that barrel to someone else. I could have filmed Nico with the lens he deserved and let truth rot his feed from the inside. I could have whispered to a critic who didn't get their reservation. But the cellar is a church of sugar and yeast. I won't use it to consecrate my anger. And Tessa, God bless the woman, likes me because I'm not a man who makes messes he doesn't intend to clean. She brings me small gifts I don't deserve. A spare hoop, a knot of twine tied in a sailor's fancy, a peach that forgives my teeth. Arya and I learned to be human in rooms again. She stayed on contract for the fall release because she's very good and I am not petty enough to set fires under the tables she sets. We texted logistics like divorced countries that still share a sea. She sent a photo of Basil bullying a sill. I replied with a photo of my palm, violet-stained, captioned "Still here." She wrote, "Proud of you," and the words wore the right shoes. Practical, unshowy, true. Nico came through the cellar with a new client, shook my hand with a pressure that said he was fine being forgiven because he hadn't asked for it. "Luca," he said, smiling into everyone's periphery, "you make the room smell expensive." "The room makes itself," I said. "I just keep the floor honest." He laughed, but he looked at my boots, which were cleaner than that line deserved, and nodded. Life went on in the honest ways. A couple bought a case and held each other like a string section had tuned in their bones. A college kid spit into the gravel with reverence. I watched a woman in her 60s taste her first Amarone and keep her eyes closed for 3 full breaths. The wind came off the hill with gossip and a threat of hail and then decided to be graceful. The ferments finished. The caps dropped. We racked. We cleaned. We slept when we could and made coffee when we couldn't. Sometimes I still wake at an hour the clock refuses to own in the apartment above the Cooper's alley, the smell of smoke sweet and done right. Tessa throws a calf over my thigh like punctuation, and I put my hand where a voice begins and wait for breath to turn into a word I recognize. That's how I tell the difference between ending and completion now. Temperature, not philosophy. The palm knows. The mouth learns. Months after the powder went to sulk at the back of its shelf, we hosted a charity auction for a hospital wing. Strings under the olive trees. White-on-white tables that made Arya's eyes the only color. She wore black in forgiveness. Her hair was shorter and for the first time in a long time looked like it liked her. "Is she kind?" she asked, not glancing toward the barrel yard where Tessa was pretending to fix something that didn't need fixing because she respects other people's narratives. "She's specific," I said, which is the highest praise I give a craftsman, and it turns out a lover. Specific is kind with a tool belt. "Be good to each other," Arya said. "You," I asked, "letting morning into rooms that don't belong to you." "I'm practicing," she said. It looked true on her. We clinked water because that's the drink that never lies. Across the lawn, Nico told a story to a cluster of donors, and they forgave him for the parts he hadn't gotten to yet. He can keep them. I had better company. A woman who can read a stave with her thumb and a cellar that trusts me with its weather. If a moral is required, the barrels will save me from making one. They are patient and not interested in your metaphors. They believe in humidity and time, and the angels share. They ask you to set the bung with an honest palm and to listen for the low music a room makes when it approves. So I tell the new harvest kids this instead of a sermon. You carry weight for a living. Sometimes that weight is a pump that needs lifting or a hose that grew a grudge. Sometimes it's someone else's bad night. Sometimes it's your own pride dressed up as principle. You learn where to put your shoulder. You learn which rooms are sacred and keep them that way. You check the seals before you complain about leaks. You test before you touch. You keep records, not grudges. Now, when the last guest has left a ring on a barrel head and the lights pretend they're stars, I make one more pass through the cellar. I run my knuckles along the body of a tank the way a person pets a big, good animal. Doors secure, I tell no one, which is a way of telling my own chest. I stand over the drain and listen to water finish its sentence. I put the blacklight back on its shelf and remind it we are better when we don't need each other. Then I go home, where a woman will smell like oak and laugh, and a bed will be ours because we keep choosing it. In the morning, there will be punchdowns and sampling and the glory of a cap that sinks like surrender. There will be emails and invoices and a forklift that demands flattery. There will be, if I'm lucky, a throat under my palm and a yes I didn't ring out of anyone. And if a bung turns 10 degrees on its own in the night, I'll notice because that's my job, and I'll decide whether to reach for the powder or the person I became when I put the powder away. I will likely choose the person. I like what he does to the wine. I like what he does to me. And I like very much the way Tessa tastes of oak and sunlight when she kisses me before work, and how, for a breathless second, the whole cellar holds its breath the way rooms do when a promise is being kept.